and I'm a Blue Coat scientist at Science North. Today I have a fun science demonstration to show you about interactions within ecosystems. Let's get started. I would like to touch base a bit on biodiversity. Biodiversity refers to the variety of all living things on Earth or in a specific habitat. This includes multiple species of animals, plants, bacteria, and fungi. All of these different organisms have a very important role to play to make sure that the ecosystem is well balanced and healthy. Biodiversity doesn't only include the variety of species, but also the diversity within species and the diversity between ecosystems. Now, an ecosystem is a community of organisms that all work together in a specific physical environment. They can be big or small, they can be marine, aquatic, terrestrial, and they all show the transfer of energy through something called the food chain. Animals and plants get their energy from the food that they eat. All living things can be classified based on what they eat. Producers are living things that make their own food. They generally use the sunlight and nutrients in their environment to help them with this production of food. Now, consumers, on the other hand, are living things that can't make their own food, so they eat other living things. This includes herbivores, omnivores, and carnivores. Lastly, we have decomposers. Now, decomposers are living things that eat waste or dead bodies of other organisms. All of these different groups are connected by a food chain that shows the flow of energy. Now, the food chain demonstrates who eats whom and what in the ecosystem. This chain, or trophic level, starts with the producers, next comes the consumer, and then the consumer is separated into categories, which are the first consumer, the second consumer, the third consumer, and sometimes even the fourth consumer. For example, the producers being the seaweed is eaten by the first consumer, crabs. Now crabs are then eaten by the second consumer, squids. Squids are then eaten by the third consumer, penguins. And then penguins are then eaten by the fourth consumer, killer whales. Now, the food chain also shows the flow of energy in the form of a pyramid. At the bottom of this pyramid, we have the producers. As organisms that eat other organisms, the energy is transferred and moves up the pyramid. However, only 10% of the total energy is being transferred from one organism to the next, because the rest is used by the organism to grow, to move, to work, to produce waste, and even to produce heat. Thus, as you move up the energy pyramid, very little energy is left to go all the way to the top consumer. This is why we don't see big populations of the third or fourth consumer, since there is not enough energy to support a large population. Now, the food chain isn't linear. In the real world, animals don't eat just one organism. They eat multiple different things. So for example, seaweed can not only be eaten by crabs, but also other fish and snails. And the same goes for the squid, which is also eaten by seals, shark, and even larger fish. All of these food chains are then interconnected and combined to form something called a food web. A food web is more like a realistic depiction of what actually goes on in an ecosystem. Ecosystems and biodiversity work hand in hand. Ecosystems with higher biodiversity tend to be more stable and more resistant or resilient to disturbances like diseases and changes in their habitats. Unfortunately, human activity has had a big impact on ecosystems. Removing one organism from the food web can cause an unbalance in the ecosystem. For example, the top consumer plays an important role by keeping other populations in check. If killer whales are removed from the ecosystem, then the penguin population would increase exponentially, thus requiring more food. But the population of squid would then decline because there are too many penguins and not enough squid. Let's take a look at some human activities that are harmful to ecosystems. Some of the big factors contributing to their decline are pollution, climate change, deforestation, and invasive species, just to name a few. Pollutants can affect land, water, and air. Humans produce a lot of waste, and the majority of the population doesn't have access to proper disposal facilities. Thus, all of this pollution ends up in the ecosystems. Plastic is one of the biggest problems for our oceans. Because of this, many marine animals consume the plastic or get entangled in it, which is problematic for the animal. Climate change is mostly triggered by the use of fossil fuels like oil and gas. The increase in CO2 and greenhouse gases heats up the planet and causes a rise in temperature. This leads to Arctic ice and glacier to melt, as well as rise in the sea level. The rise in temperature is also affecting animals like coral, who are vulnerable to temperature changes. Furthermore, deforestation has a big impact on ecosystems. As human population increases, so does the production of food. This leads to deforestation for more agriculture fields, also more lumber for construction, and to leave more space for urbanization. This is devastating impacts because the wildlife depends on these habitats for food and shelter. In addition, invasive species also have an impact on ecosystem. Now, invasive species are introduced in a new environment by goods or people traveling around the world. Many invasive species do not have a natural predator in their new environment, so this means that they take up more space and more food away from native species. Let's take a look at a species at risk, the Lake Sturgeon. This fish is one of Canada's largest freshwater fish. They can be identified by their pointy snout and whiskers. They can grow over 2 meters in length and weigh approximately 180 kilograms or 390 pounds. The lake sturgeon have a long lifespan, but they're really slow to grow. A male lifespan is around 55 years, while a female lifespan is approximately 150 years. It takes them around 15 to 25 years to mature and be able to reproduce. Lake sturgeon also occupy a wide variety of ecosystems, like shallow streams, waterfalls, large rivers, and large lakes. The sturgeons leave their large lake habitat to migrate to the same spawning area where they hatched from. Their spawning area is rocky, and the water is shallow but fast-moving. The eggs hatch once the water reaches a specific temperature, and the sturgeon will move to the feeding grounds. As they grow, they move downstream to finally to the lake for the winter. And now, to tell us a story about the importance of sturgeon, here's Dave.
Welcome to the Kaministiquia River, where I'm waiting here for the first sturgeon of the year to arrive. As you can see, this water is really moving, which is important for sturgeon as they need fast-moving water in order to lay their eggs. If you look upstream, you'll see a hydroelectric project. In some places, that can be a problem for spawning sturgeon. They can block access to grounds upstream, and the raising and lowering of water levels can sometimes affect the spawning beds, which is why biologists keep a close eye on this and other rivers across Ontario. They'll be arriving in a month or so when the first sturgeon begins to hatch. They're going to haul huge nets to catch those tiny freshly hatched fish, counting to see how well sturgeon are spawning in the river. If you're a sports person and wanted to catch a huge 150-year-old fish the size that I am, you can't. Not because they're not in the river, but because the sturgeon fishery is closed here and many other places across Ontario because the sturgeon had a very rough few hundred years. Many years ago, sturgeon made up a huge part of the Indigenous diet. It was a fish that was oily, could be smoked and dried, and still taste delicious. So it became a big part of the culture. In fact, amongst the Ojibwe and many other nations, you can be born into an animal clan. That clan animal could be, you guessed it, a sturgeon, in the same way that my clan animal is a marten. Because it forms a large part of the culture, there are many stories with sturgeon in them. For example, one of them has parts of people ending up in the river with a splash, which gave birth to the sturgeon in a kind of cool way. Which makes all this sadder when you realize that the way they've been caught changed so much. In the beginning, sturgeon were caught under the water with expertly woven nets and fishing them with spears. But about 150 years ago, it changed. With Europeans arrived, they began being herded and corralled into pens of 900 fish at a time. And what's more, they were often slaughtered, their eggs taken and sold for caviar. and the meat was sometimes wasted, used for fertilizer, or sometimes literally burned inside steamships. What a sad way for a family member to go, which is part of the reason why we'll probably be waiting a very long time for the first fish to show up. Well, besides the fact that it is early May, and they're not due to come spawn here for about another month, because it is much too cold for them and for me.
Thank you so much, Dave, for taking the time to speak about the sturgeons. So what exactly led to their population decline? Well, overfishing for the past 150 years has been a major factor. In addition to overfishing, the construction of hydroelectric dams is another factor. Dams change the temperature of the water, the flow of the water, the nutrients in the water, and the quality of the water. Dams can also block the path to their spawning habitats. Pollution can alter the food supplies and even bring chemicals into their ecosystem. Pesticides and fertilizers from agriculture fields can wash away into streams, then leading to rivers, and then leading to the lakes that they inhabit. Logging is also a factor since runoff from machines and mills can get into the water. Logging also uses waterways to move logs from one area to another, and this can destroy spawning habitats and add unwanted sediments that covers the eggs or even covers the rocky bottom that the sturgeon depends on. Right now, lake sturgeons are endangered species. There are 6 different categories to determine the risk status of species in Canada. The first is data deficient. It means that there's not enough information available to determine the status of that species. The second is special concern. Now, this species is not endangered or threatened, but may become endangered or threatened due to a combination of different threats. Number 3 is a threatened species. Now, these are not endangered, but are likely going to become endangered if steps are not taken to address factors threatening it. Number 4 is endangered species. Now, this species is facing imminent extinction and even extirpation. Number 5 is extirpated species. This means that at one time they lived in the wild in a certain place, but no longer live there. However, they can be found somewhere else in the world. And lastly, number 6, extinct. This means that the species no longer exists. So the lake sturgeon being endangered species means that their population has been declining for a certain period of time to the point where it is at serious risk of extinction. Seeing the threats that many species are facing, countries all over the world have stepped up and created rules and laws to prevent these species from becoming extinct. For example, Canada adopted the Species at Risk Act and the Endangered Species Act. These help to prevent species in Canada from disappearing, to provide recovery programs for species who are at risk, and manage species so that they don't become endangered or threatened. These kinds of measures allow governments, organizations, and individuals to work together and help species. As humans, we can have a negative impact on ecosystems, but the beauty of humans is that we also have the ability and the will to do something good for animals and their habitats. We can reverse some of the negative effects that we have inflicted. It could be a big gesture done by an individual, like reduce, reuse, and recycle, or it could be a big organization working all together to invent devices that remove plastics from oceans. All right, so imagine that an ecosystem is a big game of Jenga. The more blocks you remove, the more fragile and unstable the tower becomes. Each block plays a vital role in supporting and creating the structure of the tower so it doesn't collapse. The same idea applies to our ecosystems. All parts of life, both living and non-living, interact within an ecosystem and determines its overall health. For our activity today, we're going to build and play a game called Ecosystem Kerplunk. Now, this is to test the ecosystem of our lake sturgeon. Now, let's get started. Here is what you'll need: a die, dried spaghetti or skewer sticks, thick construction paper or toilet paper roll, scissors, hole punch or pencil, and sticky tape. Here are the steps on how to build your own Ecosystem Kerplunk game. First, start with your piece of paper or toilet paper roll and place it horizontally in front of you. Next, you're going to poke holes all over your piece of paper, but leaving the bottom and the top without holes. This can be done with various items such as scissors, hole punch, and even pencils. Make sure that someone is there to help you if you're having difficulty. Next, once your paper is covered in holes, you can take all the edges and tape them together to form a cylinder. All right, here comes the fun part. Place approximately 20 to 30 uncooked spaghetti or skewer sticks through 2 holes. So one end will be from the right side of the cylinder, and then the next end will come out to the left one. Lastly, get another piece of paper and crumble approximately 15 small pieces of paper into a ball. It should be big enough to sit on top of the stacked spaghettis or skewers without falling through. If you want, you could definitely use crafting pom-poms or even small Lego pieces. Now that we have our game all set up, we're ready to get started. To play the ecosystem Kerplunk game is very simple. I'm going to read various scenarios that affect the freshwater ecosystem where the lake sturgeon lives. Each scenario will be given a different level of severity, and in which, at the end of the scenario, I will tell you how many pieces of spaghetti you have to remove. Now, the pieces will definitely depend on the number you roll, so pay attention. Now, the little balls of paper represent the lake sturgeons. Now, once all of those little balls fall at the bottom, the game is over. Let's take a look at our scenarios. Lake sturgeons typically spawn in shallow, fast-moving water. They love areas like waterfalls or rapids with gravel or boulders at the bottom. Unfortunately, man-made barriers have restricted access to a popular spawning area. If you roll lower than 5, remove 2 sticks. If you roll higher than 5, remove 1 stick. In Ontario, the lake sturgeon is currently classified as an endangered species. This means that intentionally catching and removing these fish without permission of the Ontario government is against the law. A boat of fishermen decides that they want to take the risk and fish for sturgeons. If you roll lower than 5, remove 3 sticks. If you roll higher than 5, remove 1 stick. Sometimes natural occurrences can alter habitats. In this example, a terrible thunderstorm with violent winds caused a tree to fall over in a river, which is a popular feeding zone for sturgeon. The fallen tree has decreased the amount of water that flows into the river, and one section has dried up. If you roll lower than 3, remove 3 sticks. If you roll higher than 3, remove 2 sticks. Lake Superior is just one of the 5 Great Lakes located in parts of Ontario and the United States of America. The coastal area of Lake Superior along Highway 17 in Northern Ontario is a popular camping spot for summer tourists. However, an increased level of pollution in those areas has changed the pH level in the water. This has limited the number of microorganisms that live on the lake floor. The sturgeons are not getting enough food, so they are not reaching their ideal weight and length. If you roll lower than 4, remove 6 sticks. If you roll higher than 4, remove 5 sticks. The construction of hydroelectric facilities has limited the availability of suitable habitat for the lake sturgeons. This has been reported as one of the major factors limiting the population size of the lake sturgeon. If you roll lower than 5, remove 8 sticks. If you roll higher than 5, remove 7 sticks. Mortality rate for the lake sturgeon larvae are naturally high and few survive to adulthood. Unfortunately, few measures can change the effect of natural causes. If you roll lower than 2, remove 2 sticks. If you roll higher than 2, remove 1 stick. Lake sturgeon typically move from shallow to deeper water during the summer to avoid warm water temperatures. Recent studies have found that climate change is contributing to rising water temperatures. Unfortunately, this is not good news for our sturgeon. Even though they've managed to migrate, the water is too warm. If you roll lower than 3, remove 5 sticks. If you roll higher than 3, remove 4 sticks. Adult lake sturgeon have very few natural predators. However, deposited egg sacs are preyed upon by other species such as crayfish and mud puppies. A passing crayfish hits the all-you-can-eat egg buffet. If you roll lower than 4, remove 3 sticks. If you roll higher than 4, remove 2 sticks. Great job! You just finished our Kaplunk game. Now you can use this model to make your own scenarios based on what you know about other plants and other species. Have fun exploring the needs of different species, the ecosystem that they support, and the habitats that they live in. Keeping the balance in ecosystems is very important. As we learned in our lesson today, one small change can throw off the balance of an entire ecosystem. Human activity has posed many threats, but we also have the power to make a change and reverse these effects. All organisms play an important part in the ecosystems, and we also play a big part in keeping them safe and healthy. Lastly, the question of the day is, what process do most producers use to convert solar energy to chemical energy? Now hashtag your answer to Science at Home. Thank you so much for joining me at home today. I had a fun time teaching you about the interactions in ecosystems. Have a great day.